Writers tell you a story. A few of them, the rare ones, hand you something that feels like medicine you didn't know you needed. Karla Sorensen is one of those. I came to her books sideways. You see, I'm not a sports person. I don't watch football. And the world she writes inside is one I know nothing about. But my curiosity was piqued, and I picked up one of her books anyway. And what I found inside captivated me. I loved the way she writes her men in the books, who are drawn from inside of their own armor. They reveal the wounds traveling through generations. They face their father's voices in the mirror. And they do the slow, brave work of breaking an inherited trauma cycle. And her heroines, the women, were not there to fix anyone or to be martyrs. They had their own complexity and inner sovereignty to both stand their ground and yet also know how to surrender to their own growth. I particularly loved how Karla writes about grief with such specific care that I could not only feel it in my bones, I could admire how much better described it was than many other psychology books on the theme. So I reached out, and lucky me, Karla, with her generosity, not only said yes, but gifted me not just an interview, but a masterclass. Yes, our conversation felt like a masterclass. That's the only word that fits in how a story actually arrives, what the body of the writer knows that the mind does not, and the strange labor of bringing characters into being. Hearing Karla describe her writing process of birthing these stories onto the page gave me the image of how Jacob wrestled with the angel, viscerally, stubbornly, refusing to let go until something cracks. I admire how she follows the question, why is this person doing this? Through the thorns and thickets, all the way down to the story's core. And what comes back feels alive on the page in a way you feel it in your body. I left this conversation both inspired about my own creative process, but also with deep respect for her own visceral and embodied way to give birth to her stories. It deepened my appreciation for her characters that I learned to love. This is Romancing the Threshold. I'm Vanessa Couto, and I'm so glad you're here. Pour yourself something warm, because here's Karla Sorensen. So, Karla, how are you doing?
I am doing wonderful. How are you?
I'm good. I am so happy that you said yes. I'm very excited. I'm so glad to meet you.
Thank you for inviting me. I was almost a little intimidated to say yes, because your message that you first sent me was it was just so thoughtfully worded, and kind of what you saw in my books just from reading them. There's almost this moment of like, did I do that on purpose? Like, did I really do that? And so there's this moment of, oh my word, I hope I can even answer your questions in a way that kind of meets what you saw in my books. So I've been very excited to talk to you about this too.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I think what you're saying there is really something I've been thinking about as a reader, and the experience of the encounter. You know, I think there are many encounters that are happening. And on one hand, I'm curious about your own encounter with your characters in the process of your creation, how you're, if you will, channeling these stories, bringing them down into book form. And me as a reader, been thinking a lot about how romance reading stories, there's a very intimate encounter we all have with the book, with the characters. And as a creator myself, I know that once you birth it out into the world, we have this thing has a life of its own now, and it will interact and be a catalyst in ways that we can't even imagine. And so I imagine for you as a writer, your characters and how your readers approach you at events as such, or write to you, they're sharing stuff with you that you probably are like, oh, I didn't did that happen?
Yeah. There's definitely an element of that. And I feel it in, there's some pretty specific people actually that I can think of where the reviewers that I've gotten to know over the years that I like seek out their reviews. I typically stay pretty far away from reading reviews on my books because I'm a firm believer that reviews are not for authors, they're for other readers. And I want to be respectful of reader spaces that they can have, you know, the ability to be honest in that space, even if they hated what I wrote or it didn't resonate with them or whatever it was. There are a few people though, where over the years I've sought out what they have to say about my books, because I do feel like, and yours would probably be similar, where they see things in my books that I am almost surprised by, where it's like a theme that maybe I didn't even intentionally sit back and write out, I'm going to do this in this book, right? And so that's always like such a pleasant surprise for me to kind of be able to take in what other people parse out from my books that I didn't necessarily intend to do, but it's there. And I had a conversation with one of those reviewers, and she's a literary professor in her day job, but she also reviews romance books. And she just writes out the most thoughtful, intelligent reviews. And I love reading them. And I was talking to her about that once, and she referenced an interview with, I think it was the writer of the Joy Luck Club. And she said that's what she talked about. Like the author of any particular story doesn't necessarily intentionally choose all these themes that the readers pick out in it, but that's kind of the mystery and the joy of creating it in the first place. Is I can't necessarily sit back and point to a particular part of my brain where these things come from. I just know that they come out as I sit down and I write. And I don't necessarily even know where that instinct or that came from or how I've honed that muscle over the last 14 years of writing. All I know is that the more that I listen to it and lean into that instinct of how to tell stories and how to approach my characters, I see that reflected in people's reactions when they come up to me at signings and talk about how it helped them work through the grief of the loss of their parent. Mm-hmm. Or, you know, you showed, there was an email that I got that was just, I just cried when I got it. Because I got it on a hard day where the writing was very hard and it felt like I didn't know what I was doing anymore. And why am I doing this job? You know, this job is crazy. Like it just is. It is a very strange job that, you know, existential crises in plural, you know, I've had more of them in this job than anything I've ever done in my life. But then you get these emails, you know, where somebody said, I thought there was something wrong with me and how I was dealing with a situation of loss and grief. And reading this book made me realize that I'm okay and I'm going to be okay. I just have to get to the other side of it. And that's powerful. Mm-hmm. You know, that's a really powerful thing. And it's a responsibility that I don't take lightly when it comes to writing my stories, because there are real people going through any number of situations on the other side of their Kindle that when I put it out into the world, like you don't know who it's going to reach or what the impact of that story is going to be when I'm sitting in my office wondering if I still know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a real alchemical process, I feel. There's something, it's a mystery how, as a creator, something comes through you. And I always think about this image of sort of, each one of us is sort of a little personal water well. And we have our story and our things and our, you know, traumas and gifts and all that. But I think as a creator, you're tapping into something much deeper that goes into the sort of the collective water. And so when it's coming through you, and it's of course probably picking stuff up that you have, and it's coming through the story, but it gets transformed. And once it's out and it meets other people, the readers in this case, then it gets transformed again through what they're seeing, what they're picking up. And it's such a magical thing. I always think about that, how magical that is, really.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the collective experience that you're talking about, I've always been fascinated with why people do what they do long before I ever started trying to write a book. And I'm sure in another universe somewhere, I was a therapist.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, I have no doubt that there is another version of me that exists somewhere or made a different choice where I ended up being in a job where I could talk people through why it is what they do, why they do what they do. Because any of my friends now will tell you, I love doing that. When I think about my friends that whether it's in real life or my author friends, which I don't even know why I call them author friends. They're just my friends. I just happen to meet them because we're authors. Like, I know their family's trauma. I know their friends' trauma. I know, and because we will sit and discuss that type of stuff, because I love trying to pick apart why people do what they do. And I think it's a level when you can approach people you don't know or have never met, or, through another person, and you kind of have to view them through this empathetic lens, right? There's always a reason why people are the way that they are. It doesn't mean that we're friends with with all those people. It doesn't mean that we even particularly like them or want to have them in our life. But I think when you are interested in studying people and why they react certain ways, and you want to understand that because it helps you answer questions about them, and it gives you that level of understanding about why they react certain ways. My characters are no different to me than trying to understand my friend's sister-in-law. And it sounds a little crazy to say that out loud, that I view my characters almost as like separate entities, but they are. Like, it takes me some time to get to know them as I'm writing. So I always have like a skeleton in my head of what those characters are like. And then in the process of the book, they get fleshed out, and I find that nuance in why is this person doing what they're doing, and how can I as the author answer the question, why are they reacting this way? Why is this triggering their fear? Why does this make them want to run and hide or lash out in anger or whatever? There's always an answer to that question. And I think if we as authors want to write realistic characters who feel like real people, who react like real people, we have to be able to answer those questions of why they do what they do. We can't just make our characters do whatever we want, because then that's when you start relying on plot devices, or maybe the character comes off as inconsistent, or something feels really out of character from the way that you've set them up in the beginning. And I've always had that in me of wanting to understand why people do what they do.
Yeah, I could see that in reading your books, coming from the therapy background and mental health and sitting with clients, doing that work of literally sitting there and trying to see what's the trigger here, what's happening, what's their story. And when I came across your books, like I said to you in the email, they came to me sideways. I was just looking for the next read, and I came across, I never thought, my husband even was like, you don't even watch sports. But I'm like, I'm reading a football romance. I'm going for it, And it just grabbed me immediately, because in a way, in reading your books, I thought it made me feel like she knows. I almost felt like this was so therapeutic in story form. And I could see that the work you've been doing and thinking, why is the character doing this? What's the real reason? To me, it translated really well. They felt real. They felt like I would have met them as clients. And I could really resonate with that. And that's what really impressed me. Because even my friends are like, you don't even like sports. You don't watch it. But I was like, I'm so into this. This is amazing. Because I felt too, the way you were writing men's pain and grief, I was like, this is a masterclass in story form. I really wish people would read. Yeah. They would go beyond, if you will, the cover and the synopsis that gets you to the door. But once you open that door, I thought it was so much more. There was so much depth and feeling that I really wish a lot of people, men especially, would read your books. Because the way you describe that, I felt like it was very real. And so I was like, I want to ask her, how does she, how do these characters come to you? You started talking a little bit about that, but let's, I guess, go there. Like, how do the characters, how do the stories come to you?
I think it depends on which book you're talking about. Sometimes I have a concept of the tropes of the book before I really know who my characters are. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the characters come to me first, and then I craft the story around who maybe I think they are as people. Now, because I've always been really interested in, I guess, the psychology of personality, right? Like, I love personality tests. I love, Clifton Strengths and Myers-Briggs and Enneagram and all of that kind of stuff. I often use the Enneagram as a guidepost for my characters of, okay, this is going to build in a framework of what are they afraid of? What do they want? How do they react in certain situations? And I don't get too deep into it, as I'm writing the story. It's just like a touchstone as I'm kind of creating the characters. So that, I think, is part of that skeleton that I talked about. Like, I start with the skeleton of, like, lessons in heartbreak, for instance. So that's, Ruby and Griffin. I came up first with the idea of the identical twin brothers. That's what I pitched.
I loved that. I did. That was so archetypal. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's fun, I think. And I think leaning into those really, cliches often is used as a bad word, but listen, there's a reason that cliches become the way that they are.
Yeah. There's a resonance there. Yeah.
There's always a resonance there. And in stories too, whether you want to call it cliche or universal fantasy or, seeing certain things and having the polar opposite twin brothers is a cliche that works in story form because you can exploit that dynamic in so many different ways when you're crafting a story. So I knew who Griffin was first, and I knew that Griffin was going to be this charming, gregarious, little bit of a playboy. And what's his foil then as a female protagonist? Well, you're going to have somebody who's pretty opposite of him. She's going to be a little uptight. She's going to be very rule driven. She's going to be very structured, maybe a little introverted, where that charming gregariousness is just going to grate on her a little bit, right? Because that's the fun interplay.
Yeah.
So I start there, and then I start asking myself the why question. Well, why is she like this? What would cause her? What is something that could happen in her background that would cause her to be this way? And of course, I have to think through, what have I written recently? What have I never written before? I spend a lot of time talking about the character motivations and the backstories of that why, even if they don't take up a lot of page space in the story. Sometimes that's what I end up talking out with friends the most, is like me trying to poke holes in my own thoughts of, does this work though? Like, does this hold up enough on the page where I feel like I can carry this through the whole story?
Yeah.
And I don't feel like this is a spoiler because that book's been out for so long.
That was the first one I read.
Was that? Okay.
That was the first one. Yeah. That was the first one I came across.
I made a pretty intentional decision at the beginning of that book to kind of lean into story points that might seem like cliches. And it's almost like a challenge of, can I pull it off in a way where it still feels fresh and interesting and emotional? Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'll tell you exactly the reason why I wanted to try this. I was watching the first season of Maxton Hall on Prime. And I don't know if you heard of that show. It was based on a book series in Germany. And it's straight cliche in the very best way. And I say this as somebody like, I was eating this show up, kicking my feet as I'm watching it. I'm texting all of my author friends like, you gotta watch this. It's the rich a-hole guy at the prep school, and she's the bookish poor on scholarship, and they hate each other, and they're paired together on, and there's just scenes that are complete universal fantasy that I didn't even care that it was quote unquote cliche, because the way that she crafted that story was addicting to me. And it just made me think, like, how can you take elements like that and still do it in a way where your readers are completely invested and they are eating it up with a spoon? And so Lessons in Heartbreak was almost a little bit of a personal challenge for me, where I went, okay, normally I don't write a character with such a big medical trauma in her background.
Yeah.
Right. But it worked when I started looking at the character of Ruby and saying, why would she be this way? Why would she be so afraid of intimacy? Why would she have gotten to this point in her life and not found any sort of intimacy or found somebody that she trusted enough? And so then it turns to, okay, I can come up with her backstory. She had a heart transplant when she was younger. Okay, that jives. It feels like it's going to carry through the whole story. Why would she trust him, though? So then you back up into it even further and say, okay, she knew him before. She just hasn't seen him in a long time. They were neighbors when they were younger. There has to be a reason why this person, who's a little cynical, a little skeptical,
armored, protective,
very armored. There's got to be a reason why she trusts this guy. And it can't just be because he's hot and he has a 6-pack and I need her to.
Yeah.
That's not enough for me as a writer. Like, I really need to believe why these people are doing things. And in order to do that, I think they have to react like real people.
And that really comes across because I was very immersed in the story. That's the one I came across and I was like, sure, I'll go here, And to me, in a way, and this is what I find amazing about romance. Often the synopsis and the cover, I almost feel like it doesn't even match the medicine that's in there, the richness that's in there. The trope is just to get you across the threshold. And I was in it and I could feel the reality of it. I could feel I was invested in both of the characters very much.
I usually feel like as I'm writing, there's just, I guess I view them as separate entities. I have like my writer brain and my writer gut. Okay. And by nature, I'm an overthinker. I overthink everything. And so I always plot out my story fully, but as I'm writing, it changes. And I hit a point where it's like my gut is telling me, oh, this isn't quite right. I'm not feeling this the way that I should. It's almost like I can instinctually gauge if I think my readers are going to feel the same thing I'm feeling as I'm writing. So it's like, if I don't hit a point in the story where I cry as I'm writing, something's wrong. Mm-hmm. I'm not like clicking that story into place where maybe the readers are going to feel that same level of emotional engagement that I want them to. And that's not to say that everyone cries every time they read my books, because that's a gauge, right? Or there's a sliding scale of what makes people emotional and what makes people, in the same way that humor is very subjective. But I feel like I can usually get a gauge on whether that's going to happen or not, whether I think my readers are going to buy in the places that I want them to kind of feel that emotion. I don't know if I did earlier in my career. I don't think I had that instinct, maybe even for like the first 4 years that I was a published author. I think that came the longer that I wrote, of like really being able to hear that gut instinct and listen to it.
Yeah, what you're saying is really interesting, because I've been thinking a lot about the body as a reader. Because what has also impressed me in reading stories, especially romance, how much the body is described, the senses. There's a sense of smell and touch. Everything's very heightened. But I've now been thinking a little bit more about the body as a reader. Like, how do I feel? Do I cry? Do I feel that chest tighten? Do I feel relaxed? Do I feel awakened when I'm reading? Something in my body is being stirred as I read it. And do I feel giddy, But now what you're describing, which brings into the other side, the body of the writer. It goes through you. You have to have that gut. The emotion kind of runs through you. And then however the reader is going to take it, that's beyond your control. But in some ways, I feel like because it goes through your body, the stories carry a resonance that is powerful, because it's embodied. It's a real embodiment. It's not just caught on the plot, on the trope. Something is embodied through you. So, yeah, it takes a lot of embodiment to get a story on the page.
It does. And I always feel such a profound sense of relief when I hit that point, that I feel it when I'm writing. I can't tell you how many crying selfies I've sent to a couple of my author friends. Like, I did it, I'm crying. Where I finally, my author coach calls it perfect character alignment, right? She's like, you can write a book that's probably a 5-star book that your readers love, that they rave about, but it maybe just isn't clicked exactly into place in the way that you can feel it in your gut. But when it happens, it is absolutely a physical, tangible experience for me when that happens. Unfortunately, it always happens very late in the process. And it's usually at the end of revisions, when I've already put an astronomical amount of work into the book, where something happens and I go, oh, that's it. That's what I was missing. Like, something had to click slightly into place. And I feel it. Like, I will be sitting at my desk, like pumping my fist into the air when that happens. And it's like this high, almost like, I call it writer's high, in the same way that runners experience runner's high, because it just feels like this complete dopamine hit when it happens. But I absolutely physically feel my books. For good or for bad.
Well, I would say it's good, because as the readers can pick up on that in some capacity unconsciously. It's like the unconscious is traveling through, and there's so many questions I'm thinking here, because you already touched on how the books come to you. But I guess a little, maybe backing up a bit, when you started, because you just mentioned, it's like, I'm not so sure I did that in the beginning. How did you get into writing, and what kind of sort of spurred you on? Like, what was that decisive moment?
So I have had the interest of telling stories as far back as high school. Like, I can remember sitting down and writing little stories that we would probably, at the time, I didn't even know that there was something called fan fiction, right? And it would have been me inserting myself into like a fan fiction of a story that I loved, or, I'm meeting a celebrity that I have a crush on or something like that, right? Like self-insert fan fiction where I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to build a story or the structure of a story. And that continued through college, post-college, where I'd get ideas. I could even picture covers or, the zoomed out version of what the story was supposed to be. And I just didn't know what to do with it. I could write maybe a chapter and I'd just stall. And it was when I was pregnant with my oldest son, and he's about to turn 14. I was pregnant with him, and I read a book about writing a book. Never done that before. And it was, I'm sure it's still for sale somewhere, but it was written by a romance author that I'd read before. And she used to write sports romance way back in the day. Her name was Christy Craig. And I loved her sports romances. They were so just tropey and fun. And I just blow through one, in a day. And I just loved them. And it was like the everything guide to writing a romance novel, I think is what it was called. And in that book, it was the first time that I read about how to plot a book and a 3-act structure and putting Post-its on a poster board to try to see your story play out. And it was like something just clicked in my brain where I'd been trying to write a book without plotting it. And I am not a pantser. I have to have the structure of the book before I sit down to write everything. Specifically, I have to get through, some people call it, the climax, the black moment, the long dark night, whatever you want to call it. I have to know what's going to get us there and what's going to trigger that moment in order to start chapter 1. And as soon as I did that, I had the ability to start writing and move past like a scene or a chapter. So when I was on maternity leave, I was like, what else am I going to do? I'm just sitting here with this baby who can't talk to me and he's not crawling anywhere. And I might as well. I'm going to be home for 12 weeks, because I took my full maternity leave from my job at the time. And that was how I started writing my first book. And it took me a long time to write my first book because then I got pregnant with my second when my first was 6 months old. That was not intentional. That was a great big surprise in life. So I had 2 kids in 14 months, and it took me a year and a half to write that first book. But once I was in that, and it was a series about 3 best friends, 3 female friends. And I remember getting to the end of the second book, and I was having a conversation with my best friend, and we've been friends since she was 15. I was 16. I'm in my 40s. So it's been a long time, right?
Yeah.
And she asked me, well, what are you going to do with these books? Like, you've got 2 books now. What are you going to do? And I was trying to pitch to, query agents and all that sort of stuff. Indie publishing was still so new that many years ago. And I remember saying to her, well, I have to write the 3rd book because I would feel like I was disappointing Liz if I didn't write her story. And she kind of, made this like, oh, like kind of this shocked face. And I hadn't even realized what I said, that I genuinely felt like I would be letting someone down if I didn't write her story too, where she felt real to me. Like it felt like I would not be doing the right thing if I let her story stay untold. And it was the first moment I remember feeling like, oh, wow, this is pretty telling that I feel this way about a fictional person when nobody's read these other books, right? Mm-hmm. It was just me at that point. And that's never gone away. If anything, it just has gotten amplified the longer that I've written, where I'll finish a series and I still remember it was like my second series. It was a 5-book series about a group of guy friends. It was like 5 guy friends. And I had one story I was teasing through the whole series. This guy who'd been in love with, he'd been in love with her forever, right? Like kind of like a love at first sight sort of thing. And he was the quiet one of the group, and he was really steady and solid. And when I finished writing that 5th book, I was sobbing. I mean, my husband came into the living room because I didn't have an office in our house at the time. He's like, "Are you okay?" Because he found me just weeping on the couch. I'm like, Tristan and Anna are finally together. And I'm just so happy. Like, I felt like I'd accomplished something in real life of getting these 2 people together. And I don't know, it's just how I've always viewed my characters, that even when they take over the story or I discover something about them in the the process of writing, like that's always been there from the beginning. I just think I maybe do like a better job of listening to that gut instinct now than I did at the beginning when I first started writing however many years ago.
I love your description. In my mind right now, I'm thinking, oh my God, she's like a shaman, these characters. There's this concept of the imaginal world, where it's not this world, it's not another world, it's kind of an in-between world. And as you're describing your relationship with the characters, I'm thinking about the imaginal, where that's why I'm always so interested about how do authors bring in the characters in. And apparently Tolkien did that. He felt the story was given to him. And the way you're describing it to me, it feels like you tap into that world. And when you say the characters are their own entity. And I feel that. I feel like characters, they're coming from another place. They're coming from this imaginal world. And the author is the shaman, the channeler, the shaman, vessel. The vessel that is, of course, working like back to the water vessel. It's working through you, and you bring it out. You help them be embodied into this world in the form of a book, and then the reader then interacts with them in a different way. Right? They become lived, alive entities in the reader's life. Especially that's why I think it resonates so much when certain characters become so big, in the collective imagination. And so what I'm thinking when you're describing that, I was like, oh my God, she's really sort of going to the imaginal world and bringing them in, sort of helping them be birthed over here. And it's interesting that your origins.
It feels like labor sometimes as I'm writing the book.
Yeah, it is. And it's interesting, your origin story with it as well, that you had just birthed your first child and you've gone through that. And then you channel the characters in. It's like the vessel was ready. It was tested, it brought a human being. Now it can bring other beings. What I'm curious here is, mainly because what I've really stood out to me in your work is how you write the masculine. And in light of the currents, well, not just the current, but it seems really poignant now, the situation of very bad examples of the masculine, let's just say, showing how much healing the masculine needs to do. Not that the feminine doesn't, but definitely, because I really appreciate the depth of the juxtaposition of your male and female characters. I feel that your female characters are not there to fix the male. They both have their own wounds and they're just alchemically sort of working it out together. But what stood out to me, and I really appreciate your male characters, is the depth in which they bring. And then I feel like you're right, you're feminine that way too, but the masculine stood out to me. Tell me a little bit more about what's the inspiration for the male characters you're bringing forth, especially because they're in a hyper masculine environment of sports, especially the ones I read, football. And I'm like, this is just great. This is the medicine we need right now. But
yeah. Well, I love that. I love that juxtaposition of the job that they do, which is so public facing and they have to create a brand of themselves almost. But at the end of the day, they're still just normal people. They're still just people who do extraordinary jobs that are a lot more public than the rest of us. And I also think there's an element of when you watch maybe behind the scenes stuff of sports or whatever, and we watch a lot of sports in my house. You know, my boys love sports and love football, and I do too. I was raised watching it, so I write it because it's my favorite sport to watch. There's this element of watching football players where it's like they tap into something childlike that they get to do. And I mean that in a positive way, right? You know, where they're playing this game for a living, which is very physically demanding and it takes a toll on their life, but they do get to access something that usually we only do as kids, the play element that they have. But to me, it just doesn't erase. And I think that goes back to kind of that empathetic thinking of trying to understand people, where it doesn't, that public part of their job or the hypermasculine or even the pressure that's on them from the amount of money that they make or whatever, it doesn't negate the fact that they could be going through really horrible things or have gone through horrible things. I think we see a lot of football players more willing now to talk about mental health struggles that they've had or struggling with depression or anxiety or whatever, or coming from really broken homes. I have always found the male point of view easier to write than the female point of view, actually. I'm not sure what that says about me, but I actually feel like it's easier for me to pretend to be something different with the male point of view. Whereas with the female, I have to kind of try not to channel my own turn of phrase or the way that I think. Or
it's a little too close, perhaps, you know?
It's a little too close, perhaps. And so I've always found that male point of view, like if I could write a pining male hero for the rest of my career, and I just do that for every single book and get away with it, I would do it in a heartbeat. That's just my favorite thing to write. And I always feel like I can really just dig my hands into it in a way where I lose myself in that character really easily.
You do that really well.
Thank you. You know, the one that when I wrote him, I just felt like was when I wrote The Best of All, which was Liam. Okay.
Oh yeah. Lovely.
That man lived in my head like he was screaming into my brain with a megaphone up to his mouth. Like I heard him so clearly. I knew exactly how he wanted to sound in my head. The way that he loved her, I mean, it was like, I very rarely have an easy writing experience, but Liam was as close as I probably got to an easy writing experience when it came to his character.
And you did say to me, and I think a quick exchange on Instagram, that the inspiration was Roy Kent from
100%.
And I was like, once you said, I was like, oh my God, it totally is. And he's great. And that scene
Roy
he takes her to the bookstore. Winner.
That's universal fantasy. That's like channeling those moments where it's like, come on, we all want that to a certain, you know what I mean? Where he knows exactly what is going to speak to her heart. Yeah, Roy Kent to me is one of the best characters that's come on television in a really long time.
Yeah.
And I just loved that show in general. I love Ted Lasso. I'm so excited for it to come back. I'm already like, nobody talk to me on August 5 because
I'm busy.
I'm busy. But I think that's another thing where I wish I had like a clear-cut answer of where they come from in my head. And I don't. I feel like they're just there. And I get to know them better as I'm writing them, where my author coach who I work with, and she bases her coaching on Clifton Strengths, right? So everybody, you're taking your Clifton Strengths test, and then she's working with people to embrace your process based on how your own brain works. Like you're not trying to work like someone else's process.
Yeah.
And my number one strength is relator, which is very closely tied to like trust. And I have a very tight circle of people that I trust, but I do enjoy getting to know and understand other people. But my characters, it like takes me a while to kind of break through maybe that first kind of surface level, that shallow introduction of here's the skeleton, here's the block of clay that I'm pushing towards the story. And I have to kind of carve out what's underneath it as I'm writing. It doesn't necessarily make for the most enjoyable first draft experience when I'm writing. I usually suffer greatly writing the first draft. If anything else, like I'm pretty miserable as I'm writing the first attempt at the story. But then once I kind of break through that and I get to know them, it just feels like magic. Like there's just no other way to describe it, where I know exactly when it's right. I know exactly when it's working and when I've kind of figured out something about those characters that needed to be figured out. And I think when it comes to the men and the trauma maybe that informs who they are as characters, I would be lying if I said I didn't think through. This is a sweeping generalization, and I know that. Mm-hmm. Not every reader is like this. And I would say a lot of readers aren't, but there's a huge percentage of the population of romance readers that they are way harder on the female main character than they are on the male main character.
Yes. Yes.
And this is even people who would be like, I'm a feminist in my ideology. Let's burn down the patriarchy. They say that with their whole chest, and they are still going to be harder on the female protagonist than they are on the male protagonist, right? She's a doormat for waiting around for him, but he's a pining hero that we love.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah.
She's emotional and moody, but he's like tortured, and like he could kick puppies and we'd probably find a reason to love it because, and I think that's just so deeply ingrained in, and I don't know if it's because we relate more to the female protagonist if we're reading it, if we're reading those books. I'm not sure. And I'm not saying that I'm not guilty of it sometimes too. Maybe it feels too true to life and we can separate ourselves a little bit more from the male main character. So I do think about that when I'm crafting my stories sometimes, where there's usually one character that has to kind of carry the bulk of the weight when it comes to needing an emotional arc. Mm-hmm. I think when you have two that have equal amounts of growth to do, sometimes it can get a little cumbersome in the story. And the impact is a little bit lessened. There's a plotting technique called the nutshell technique, and it talks about that. Like you should really have one character in the story who's got the bulk of the growth to do. It doesn't mean that your other one doesn't, or that there's not change that needs to happen. And I am cognizant of that as I'm writing, of just that generalization of my readers are going to be harder on her than they are on him. And I still have to answer all the same questions about why does she do what she does? Why does she react this way? But I might give him just a little bit more baggage to overcome throughout the story, because I know that they're probably going to give him a little bit more grace. Yes.
And I could see that in having read so many. I can see your female characters, to me, stood out in they feel whole. Even their issues that they're bringing up feel real. And so I think they're a good match. And I can see that the male is the one that's carrying more baggage. In some ways, he's the main character. And that's a good question. A good point you make about a lot of readers perhaps being harder on the female character. I have found that even in myself. Like, why do I have a harder time liking the female character? And I'm easier on the male character. And I think there's a PhD waiting to happen right there, just on that question alone.
We would need a different podcast.
To go. This could be a real interesting question to ask for several authors and readers. But I think sometimes what's happening is perhaps the female character is too close to us. We are projecting very quickly onto the character. And then perhaps we're judging, well, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't, X, Y, and Z. And the male character becomes this, I think, not just a fantasy of what we wish. The reason I'm thinking a lot about romance as medicine is because I think because it activates so much in us as readers, and it is the genre that holds a lot, even though it doesn't get the limelight as much, is that perhaps with these stories, there's a hidden unconscious healing happening between the male and the female. So I think when we see the male transforming, having corrective experiences, dealing with their vulnerability, with their trauma, coming, and that's why your story stood out, because these are characters in a very masculine environment. When we see that, I think it creates in us a sense of hope and perhaps still, I feel, unconscious rehearsal where the healing can happen. That's why I was saying these times where the masculine and the feminine are really at odds and so pronounced, seeing male characters that transform becomes, definitely medicine to me, but also very hopeful. I really wish men would read your books.
I wish they would read it and be able to absorb a lot of things in romance, to be perfectly honest, because there's so much of it where at its core, right? It's like we all just want to be loved and respected and seen by someone who's willing to meet us where we are and move forward together, right? Like in the same way that like I can't fix my husband, with whatever issues he's going through, and vice versa. He can't fix me, but to be seen and understood and respected and supported, like that's all we all ever want. And I think that's why women gravitate towards romance so much, is because like that's all we want. Like it seems like such a simple concept that's very hard in execution. And in my own real life, obviously without getting into a whole nother hour's worth of conversation, like my husband is a cycle breaker within his family in terms of like family trauma that happened. And so I get a front row seat to someone who is like, no, I'm not going to be somebody who's going to tell my boys they're not allowed to cry or feel their emotions or, anything like that. Like, I'm not going to do that. That is something that I get a front row seat to in my life, which I'm very fortunate for that. And so I think that in and of itself, of seeing men be willing to admit where they can do better and then actually do better, is kind of the ultimate universal fantasy for a reader, right? Like that's what we want. Is I don't think anybody is expecting perfection. And I don't think romance gives readers this assumption of perfection in their life, that that's what we're really searching for. But I do think it allows us to believe that people can see where they've done wrong, take accountability for that, and then we try to get better together. Right?
Yeah.
Like that's ultimate universal fantasy to me, in terms of like healthy communication and building a solid relationship.
Because in many ways, I think it is an absolute healing arc. You start broken, if you will. There's a problem. There's an issue. You can't communicate. This is not quite going right. And then you meet another there's a catalyst. So the love is a catalyst. And you go through all the trials and tribulations, the breakup, the separation, all that. That my husband was asking me, what's with the breakup? Because I jokingly say, 100 pages before the end, they're going to break up. And he's like, what's with the breakup? And I said, well, I think in many ways, the breakup is whatever was not quite right in the foundation of that relationship needs to sort of come undone so that when they do come together, then it's much stronger, whatever is the last layer of the armor. And then the alchemical union, right, comes in. And I think to call romance childish because it's predictive or such, it's a disservice, because as a reader, you're going through that whole journey. And something within you is starting to shift as well, depending on how deep you want to read those books. And collectively, I think it speaks to something that isn't just a female fantasy. I think it's needed in these times of collective transformation. It's too much happening from all fronts, right? And I feel that romance teaches us that transformation is possible. There's hope. And the coming together comes in. So I do think romance authors like yourself are doing 3 layers of work. You're writing a story that inspires you. You're writing something that perhaps the current fashion wants. Maybe it's the kind of story that's selling and people are resonating with. But at a much deeper level, it's shamanic. It's a deeper medicine to the collective. And so kudos to you birthing the books and struggling. And that's why I think perhaps for you, it feels so cathartic as well.
Oh, it feels very cathartic. And it's that moment at the end where everything clicks into place, where I'm like, this is why I do this job. Because in those other moments, and I mean, it's like clockwork when I have those meltdowns, and my husband and my kids have seen me come out of my office crying more times than I'd care to admit. 'Cause I'm like, this is it. This is the book that's going to break me. I can't figure it out. It happens every book. And I am always convinced that it's really like, I'm not going to get onto the other side of this one. And they do a very good job of just listening to my meltdowns. And it's always right on the cusp of that, where I have this flicker of a thought where I go, oh, wait a minute. And then I kind of start writing notes. And then I have a realization about something and it's always right on the heels of this really big existential meltdown about why am I voluntarily putting myself through this? This is certifiable. I should.
It's a dark night of the soul.
Detail or whatever, And then I have that moment where everything clicks into place, and there's just nothing like it. I mean, there's nothing that feels like that, but it's absolutely cathartic. And I can admit sometimes when I think of story ideas, it's literally because I just feel like it's going to make me feel better to write that story. Where that sounds like a good outlet to me to write that story. It's
deeply therapeutic in a way that the origin of the word is a service to the gods. It's a service to something bigger. It's like you come to the dark night of the soul, and then the sun rises again. You're at it. Yeah,
and to be honest, I don't always have a third act breakup in my book, like you talk about. The breakup is a big point of contention in the reader world, because I think there's a lot of new readers who do not want that. They don't want the third act breakup, and I would argue they don't want a poorly written third act breakup where
I agree, yeah.
The conflict feels contrived or it comes out of nowhere. I think when they read a well done third act breakup, they don't even think about it. They just enjoy the story and the journey of getting there.
And I was pleased to notice in your books, you don't have that. It makes sense. The story, whatever the challenge and conflict that really kind of brings it in, it makes sense to the flow. And I don't like the poorly written when it's like, oh, here it comes. I can see it a mile away. Yeah.
Yep. And if I write like a slow burn, the climax of the story, what you're building to, is not a breakup. It's literally the decision to be together. And you have to kind of go through, which is why those are fun to write sometimes. And those are enjoyable in a different way, because it's a different sort of challenge of, can I build their chemistry and tension in a way that feels realistic and believable? But I also believe why I'm torturing my reader and making them wait until 95% of the book before these two people kiss. And you just want to like shove their heads together, like, just kiss already,
So close. And then, they get interrupted. Yeah.
Well, and that's what happened in, the other twin in Barrett's book, where he's like,
that was a slow burn.
That was a slow burn, because I went to my editor and I said, I kind of want to write a grumpy. It's not Grumpy Sunshine. I think they're both kind of going to be grumps. I know people don't do that very often.
Yeah.
And she's so great. She's like, you write whatever you want. Your job is just to write the best Karla Sorensen book possible. If you want to write a grumpy, let's do it. And so I knew, like, with that sort of story, the only thing that feels believable to me is when you have two really guarded characters that have legitimate reason to be guarded. They are going to wait. It is going to take a long time for them to trust each other. And I love writing that. My readers get mad at me a little bit when I write those stories, because when I say it's a slow burn, they know. They know I mean it. I'm not, saying like slow burn, but they kiss at 50%. No, I'm probably going to make you wait until the last 10% of the book. But
I having met him in the previous book, Lessons in Heartbreak, I was like, oh, am I going to like him? I don't know. He's real grump. And then I read it and I was like, oh, it's hard to choose, because I was Team Griffin. And then I was like, oh, I can't, because archetypally, they're amazing as twins. They're perfect foils. And I do like a grump. I think it's a breath of fresh air, because
that was fun. It was fun to write.
It feels more realistic, I think, for real life, I suppose, to a certain degree, to see guarded people coming together. Mm-hmm. And so, and speaking of that, like you mentioned your readers a little bit, when they find you, when they speak to you, not the reviews per se, but like when they meet you or they DM you, what do you think what do they tend to tell you about your books?
I think I hear a lot about grief and loss when they message me, because that's such a prominent theme in my books to begin with. And that's something that when I realized that was one of the themes that kind of unconsciously kept popping up over and over in my books. I learned about the concept of writing to your id, right? Like the id, the ego, the superego. Mm-hmm. And writing to your id is like picking out this list of themes that just kind of unconsciously keep popping up in your books. You maybe didn't intend it. It might be little moments or micro tropes that you really tend to gravitate to. For me, it's more big picture themes. And grief and loss was one of those for me that I didn't necessarily make a conscious choice to start working that in as a theme over and over in my books, but it just happened the longer that I did it. And that's because my brain liked it. My writer brain enjoyed digging into, again, why do certain people react certain ways, or even how do people react differently to the same loss? Mm-hmm. Like my Ward Sisters series, which was kind of my quote unquote breakout series, I suppose, if you had to call anything, that's really where my reader base expanded exponentially. It was, the theme of maternal abandonment, right? Mm-hmm. Like their mother left them when they were young. And so you have 4 sisters who went through the same experience, but they all reacted to it very differently. And it showed up differently later in their lives, that wound of their mother leaving them. Mm-hmm. So I hear a lot about loss and grief for people when they message me. And that doesn't bother me. It doesn't make me uncomfortable. It means a lot to me when people are willing to talk about their experiences with losing a parent or losing a spouse or whatever it was. In previous to working full time as a writer, I worked for a hospice. And so I loved it. Like I loved working there. I loved being at our hospice residence. Before I had kids, I volunteered there one night a week. And my dog at the time, I had him certified as a therapy dog. And so we'd go and visit people, and like, I loved it. It wasn't depressing to me. It wasn't like, it really is kind of a beautiful, bittersweet part of life when you're in a situation where like everybody knows what's happening. We know what is going to come from the end of this. And it's that anticipatory grief that is different than sudden death or a shocking death or something like that. Right. And so I hear a lot about grief and loss from people, and that means a lot to me when they are willing to tell me their stories. After Lessons in Heartbreak came out, I had a woman message me, and she was a reviewer who I've interacted with on social media numerous times. And she reached out to me just telling me how much that book meant to her, because her husband had a double lung transplant. And he tried to break up with her for the exact same reason that Ruby tried to break up with Griffin. And she said, it was like you were writing us, like you were writing our story. And it just felt so real. And the things that she thought were the things that he thought. And she said, I had 10 wonderful years with him, before he passed away. And I don't want to even cry thinking about it, because it's like, you do forget sometimes that when you're writing these stories, like the people who are reading them may have gone through something exactly like that. I'm not necessarily thinking about that as I'm writing these stories, right? I'm just trying to answer questions for my characters in a way that I feel like I can support an entire book with it. But that to me is the most rewarding part of doing a job that really can twist you into a lot of mental knots. When you feel like your story hits home for people who've gone through something like that, for sure.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you said that also about your working in hospice, because I fell into reading romance out of grief and burnout. Romance was not the genre I tended to gravitate towards. It was always sort of nonfiction. And my mother died in 2024. I was burned out from being a mental health coach, and I was exhausted. And the only thing that kind of grabbed me that I could hold on to was reading romance. And I could totally see the medicine in it. And now that you express your experience, I can see it, because in reading the way you write grief, I felt, having worked with clients on that and lived it, I felt how embodied it is, how real it is, and an absolute masterclass in it, I feel. So if I was to give a course on reading romance, I'd definitely pick your books as, okay, definitely let's work on some of these here, because I thought it was really well done, having had both sides of the experience. So it shows that being in hospice, working with that, translated. So I'm thankful for that.
I miss it. There's a lot about, that whole experience that I do really miss, and I enjoyed tremendously. It's just, this is what I feel called to do. I mean, this is, so as much as I miss that, like, I can't ever imagine, I can't picture myself doing anything else than this, no matter how much it twists me into knots, or how miserable those first drafts are, for a while. It's such a mind trip. And I've talked about this with my husband, where when I'm in a week that's maybe really hard and it just feels like pulling teeth to get every single word down. It's like, but would you ever want to do anything else? It's like, no, like it's not even a question in my mind that like, this is the hardest I've ever worked at any job. And it has taken the most from me of anything I've ever done. And I don't ever want to do anything else. And I think that's often how you're probably where you're supposed to be when you can say that and mean it.
I sometimes think of that image in Jacob's ladder. He's wrestling with the angel at night in the darkness. And I feel as a creative, sometimes we're wrestling with that. We're wrestling with something. It's us.
Yeah, we are.
And then the light of day comes through. So that's really powerful, but it translates into your work, So I think we're grateful for that. I know we're sort of coming towards the end. I mean, so much. We could have hours of this. I would just extend, if you ever want to come back, I would love to have you again. I know you have some more books coming out that there's one in particular that you mentioned. He's British, and I'm already signing up for that one.
Oh yeah, my amnesia book.
Your amnesia book. So like, for an example, something like that, how does the idea come up for you?
Well, I have, over the years, I've read books and seen movies with that trope. And in truth, you just don't see it a lot in romance. It's not one that comes up often. And I just wanted to try. I wanted to see if I could do it. I wanted to see if I could take my spin on it. And when I pitched it to my editor, I was like, I'm not sure she's going to want to go for this, because I typically write in interconnected standalones and, kind of like allow the world to build on itself. And it wasn't sports. And so I wasn't, and she right away was like, yeah, I want you to write an amnesia book. Are you kidding me? Then I just had to wait for the right time in my schedule and, get through, let's do this series first and then this, and, you're kind of piecing it together that way. And I realized as I was writing it, there's not a lot of them because it's hard. It's really hard to write an amnesia story.
I can imagine.
I cursed my own ambition quite a few times in the past of writing that book.
You're like, Karla, why did you do this to yourself?
Why did I choose this? But it was a fun challenge, and I am very glad that I wrote it. But it's also and this is just a personal thing, like I actually hate flashbacks in a book. Mm-hmm. I hate them. It is one of the few, it's why of 35 books I've written now, I have only written 2 second chance romance books. Mm-hmm. And that is because it's my least favorite trope, because I don't like flashbacks. I've read them where they're done really well, but just as a reader, like I find it hard to read a story where I end up caring more about the past versus the present, or it like pulls the tension out of the story for me to have to keep going back and forth. And so it's like, if I'm going to write a second chance, which arguably amnesia in a form is second chance, right?
A pretty brutal one.
Pretty brutal one. But I'm like, can I do this without any flashbacks? Can I do this without... And my 2 second chance romances that I wrote, I don't have flashbacks in those either. Because again, it's like I almost view it as a challenge of how do you keep the tension? How do you get your readers invested if you're not actually showing them the past? Mm-hmm. Can you do that? And so that's why it's like, well, there's 2 ways to do amnesia. It's she runs into him later after they've been separated and she doesn't remember their past. Okay. That's one way to do it. Or she's waking up in the hospital with no memory. There's really no other way to do that type of story. And I knew which one I'd probably be able to get away with no flashbacks. And that's waking up in the hospital.
That's awesome. Because funny enough, when I was born, my mother had a very difficult labor. And she went into a coma, and for 13 days.
No.
And, oh yeah. And I was a premature baby. I was in the incubator. She was in a coma. Everybody thought both of us were going to die. And when she woke up, she had total amnesia. So when my father showed up, she said that it took her like a year to start remembering things. And for many years, patches of her life, she didn't remember. She knew because people told her that what happened. But she said the only thing my father walks in, and here we are. And she's like, she had a sense she had something to do with him, but she didn't know what. She didn't know anything. She didn't know she had a child. So I think when I saw the synopsis of your book, I'm like, I'm signing up.
Mm-hmm. You can't tell stories like this to a writer because
go ahead. You can use some of that.
Instantly, I'm like, if I had known this before I started writing my amnesia book, 100%, I would have written her having just given birth, because that is juicy.
She didn't know. Yeah, she was completely out, and it took a long time. It took, like she said, a year. She was quite sort of slowly, But I can always, in my mind, I imagine that encounter with my father where he's like, "So you're alive? Yes, great." And she's like, "Who are you?" Like, yeah. So that true story.
What an incredible. And so then she just, sorry, I'm going to start interviewing you now. So she just, after a year, it kind of just like, she remembered him?
No, I think with a little bit closer in, she started remembering. And I think, a lot of it was sort of patched together by people telling her, no, you're married. You this is what you do. She was a teacher, this is what happened. And so I think it took like her a year to sort of start really kind of remembering parts of her life and feeling like what people were telling her really matched with what she remembered, if you will. But she did say for several years, chunks of her life were like, she didn't quite remember. She didn't have that visceral memory. She just sort of knew it happened. But I think within perhaps a few months, she was like, okay, because I think the first reaction she had to him, she's like, she knew, she had a sense that she had something to do with him. He wasn't completely foreign to her. She just didn't know she was married to him, and she just had a child.
Incredible. Yeah. You should, what my brain is doing right now is just like, I'm going to think about this for a while.
Yeah. That was just true, like I said, true story. I'm bummed down that I didn't really ask my father how he felt, and he's passed away already. But now I'm thinking I should have asked him some more detailed questions later in life to be like, how did you feel when she reacted to you in that way? Yeah. So
fascinating. I mean, I don't need to write another amnesia story, but if I ever did, I'm going to remember.
Could be a side character, what happens? That's a really interesting question. So that's something that's happening to you now. But I'm curious now, when you're interacting with readers or other people interviewing you for anything, what is a question that they've never asked you that you're like, they haven't asked you about it as a writer?
Honestly, no. Yeah, I'm not sure that I can really think of anything where I've had a very concrete thought like that of, I can't believe nobody's ever asked me that, just because I'm kind of a rambler by nature. So I think if there was information that I really wanted to get out into an interview, I'd probably find a roundabout way to get there anyway. If I felt like it was important information. So I don't know that I can answer that question specifically. And, I just think there's so much that you can ask a writer anyway that maybe I wouldn't think of, or, that I don't necessarily have like a list of things where it's like, I wish people knew this, So I'm not sure I have a concrete answer to that question.
Yeah. And I'm glad everything you said in our conversation, I felt too that I was receiving a very lived in experience of how to write, how to engage with our own creative process as a writer, and what it feels like. It can feel how dark night of the soul it can be, but how such a cathartic experience it also is. And so I'm really glad to hear that.
I know there are so many authors whose process is probably a lot cleaner than mine is. And I'm sure they are more mentally sound as a result when they come, because that's the thing. It's like, there's 1,000 different ways to do this job. There's 1,000 different ways to be successful in this job. And, you know, I know that my process of how to write a story isn't the right one, quote unquote. It's just the way my brain works when I'm trying to piece together a story. You know, and I've had people who will message me, maybe it's like an aspiring author or an author that just reads my books or whatever, and they'll say like, oh, I want to do what you do. And I always laugh a little bit. I go, you do not want to mimic my writing process. I promise you. It is messy, and I mean, legitimately, I don't say it to be funny. Like, I'm miserable when I'm writing the first draft. It's not fun for me. I always second guess myself, and I'm always trying to be better than what I did the last time. And there's like a crippling perfectionism that comes with doing this job where it's like, you want every book you write to be the best book you've ever written. Mm-hmm. That's not even logical to have that happen, right? Like, because it's subjective. What I do is inherently subjective, because there are people who are going to read my books and think they're crap, or that my characters are boring, mm-hmm. or whatever. I can't control that.
And others can feel totally seen.
Tell the story. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's hard, because even when I think about my process of writing the story, when I explain it, I'm like, please don't try to do what I do. It sounds so unhinged, when I say it out loud to somebody. But
I don't have the same process as you when I'm trying to do my articles and my creative process, but I think the thought that there's a perfect way, there's one way. I think that we all enter the forest in different ways, and you enter your forest in one way. And it sounds like in some ways, almost for each book, you're entering the forest from a different side, and you traverse that landscape. And for anybody trying to do that, it's not going to work. It's not the way they enter the forest. There's no only one way. That's the beauty of it.
I think the quickest way, honestly, to make this job unbearable is to try to mimic someone else's process when it's not working for you. In the same way that you can't give a bullet point list of how to be successful, how to make money, because what works for one person is not going to work for another person. And I really think that's just the quickest way to send yourself into just really dangerous territory mentally, when you're trying to recreate something that, like, your brain's just not, it's not built that way. My brain is not wired in the way where I can plot a book, make a decision at the beginning, stick with it at all costs, and come out to the end without any second guesses, any doubting, any changes. I could try very hard to do that, and I genuinely think I wouldn't have written very many books if I'd tried to stick to that formula.
And I wonder if they would even resonate. I think the power of it, of the way so when you were talking about your creative process, the image I had was of Michelangelo carving the marble, and the struggle to carve the marble. But when he would carve, he would get to a certain point where he, in essence, would turn to the statue and say, "Go, walk." He could see it. He was carving out of the marble what wanted to come out of the marble. Mm-hmm. And that's the image I had when you were describing your writing process.
Yeah.
You're Michelangelo of romance.
I'll put it on my bio.
You should put it on your bio. Okay, so now we shift to a little Actor Studio meets Colbert rapid fire. So just answer from your gut. And I think some of these you might have already touched. But so, number one, are you ready?
I think so.
Let's go for it. The book that first shifted something in you as a reader before you were a writer?
Oh. I actually think I read it while I was writing some of my early books, but I'm going to count it. Was On the Island by Tracy Garvis Graves. It will forever remain in my top probably 3 stories I've ever read. And I just I mourned the end of it when I was finished reading that story, and I put off reading it for a very long time. When I read the description, I got it from the library and then it expired, and then I got it again from the library. And I think I let that one lapse too before I finally was like, just read it. You've heard so many good things about it. And I just think it's one of the best love stories I've read. I just really adored it. And I've shouted it from the rooftops for a very, very long time. It's one of those where if it actually ever became a movie, I don't even know if I'd want to see it, because I just love that story so much. So I would say On the Island by Tracy Garvis Graves.
Okay. Number 2, what trope you love, and has that changed at all as a writer versus as a reader?
No, I like the enemies to lovers, even though enemies reads very dramatic and big, more like fantasy or, something like that. But that dislike to love, where it's so banter heavy and the tension is really high. It's my favorite as a reader, and it's my favorite as a writer too, because I just think there's so much opportunity for really good scenes when you have that type of material to work with. So no, that has not changed.
Yeah, I personally love enemies to lovers with a good dash of forced proximity. I love that. And number 3, which of your heroes in your books, or heroine, the characters, surprised you most? And they became someone you didn't expect when you started writing them.
Boy, that's a tough one. I think probably the character that surprised me the most isn't even necessarily because of what happened within her story, but I think the way that my readers have forever championed her as their number one, I'm not sure anyone's ever going to top her, is my female protagonist in The Marriage Effect. Her name is Paige McKinney. And that couple specifically, Logan and Paige, really just, my readers are just feral for those two. And those books came out in, 2018. So it's been a long time. I firmly believe if I wrote their story now, I could do a better job with it than I did at the time that I wrote it. But it kind of spawned this universe of, then I wrote his half-sister stories, which were my Ward sisters stories. I kind of spun off from their book. But Logan and Paige, I'd say there's something about her and her protectiveness of the people that she loves. She is not my nicest heroine. She is not my softest heroine. But they are obsessed with her. And I think that's kind of fun to have something like that where it's wow, you guys are not moving on from her anytime soon, where I'm not sure there's ever been a heroine that I've written where I've gotten such a visceral reaction as I have her.
Yeah, she took a life of her own,
She did. Yeah, she did.
Number 4, a book you think every man should read, romance or otherwise.
Of my books or any book?
Well, let's start with your books.
Also, the lawn crew just showed up in my backyard. I told you they were going to. I knew it.
Right on cue.
Right on cue. One book I think every man should read. Oh, you are going to test me. I actually think that if I'm going to pick one of my books, I actually feel like The Best of All is probably the one that I would pick, because the way that he had to make a decision for how to overcome his own fears in a way where he wasn't waiting for somebody to give him permission. He wasn't waiting for someone to like force him into doing it. There was no, oh, he's just right by my window. It's just real. Sorry if it's real loud.
That's okay. It's part of the process. They're coming in, you know, they got called in.
Yes. I would say I'm going to go with The Best of All, because I think Liam really embodied the strength and the courage that I think it takes to be somebody who's willing to break a cycle that they've seen in their family over and over. And I think it's done in a way where maybe men could actually absorb it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I really, his character was very powerful, and just the symbolism of that he would see himself in the mirror and see his father. I mean, it's all there. It's Shakespearean to a certain level.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really like that one. And he's British. Can't go wrong with that one.
I apologized to my mom before I published that book. So I was like, Mom, he swears a lot. I'm just going to warn you right now, because she reads all of my books. And I'm like, I'm just going to warn you. Yeah. Lots of F-bombs in that book. She's like, okay, I'm ready.
I loved it. Now, the last one, and I think you touched on this a little bit, but where do your characters come from? Did they arrive as an image, a feeling, a situation? What's the first spark?
I would say that they arrive as, let me think, a feeling first. To be honest, sometimes I don't even, like, I know a lot of authors who spend a ton of time making like Pinterest boards of, you know, physical muses or inspirations or things like that. And honestly, the longer I write, the less I do that, because it just doesn't feel as vital as it did in the beginning to be able to picture every single inch of them physically, because it's just more of like a vibe in my head of what the character is like. So I would say they come from a feeling first, of whether that's, I know what I want their book to be like, and therefore I'm going to craft them around it. Or, so I would say they come as a feeling first.
Yeah, I as a reader, I feel that, because the cover for me, it's almost like I don't want to notice the cover. It's almost like the vibe of the character, the feeling I get is what gets more powerful than the image. The image sometimes distracts me.
Sure.
Well, this was I learned so much, Karla. Thank you. Thank you for your generosity, and thank you for really having us have a little behind the scenes look of your creative process. I learned a lot. There was a lot for me to even think as a writer, as a creator.
Yeah.
And I really do appreciate the way you write them. I feel
Thank you.
It's needed. It's needed, and it's resonating as you have your fans. So I'm definitely looking forward to whatever's coming up. Do you have anything that's coming up sooner that you're writing?
No, this year was kind of a strange one, because I have my Wilder Family series, which is re-releasing in bookstores.
Mm-hmm. With the new covers?
With the new covers with Source Books. And so, that's just 4 books just this year releasing into stores. And it's just a lot. It's a lot for promo, and to try to, with publishers, you have to write really far in advance. So it's a matter of balancing your schedule, where I'm like, okay, well, I have to write, the book I just finished and turned in is not releasing for another year. So it's like, right now I'm 3 books ahead. You know what I mean? Because I've got I've got, I'm sorry, I'm 2 books ahead right now, but I will be 3 books ahead come July or August when I turn in my next book for next spring, whatever, next summer. So I just kind of had to make a decision, like, which year do I want to only do 2 new releases? Because I have to write something ahead of time. And this felt like the year that made the most sense because of all of my source books re-releases. So next year I'll be back to 3 new releases. And then, hopefully that routine will kind of become more normal. 3 is about my limit. Anything more than that, and I kind of start getting to be maybe not the best version of myself for my children and my husband.
it's yeah. You have to balance the cathartic and the wrestling with the joy of just being present with your life and for your family.
And I need time. I need time in between books. I have a lot of author friends that can finish a book and then they take a long weekend off and then they start the next one on Monday. And I am not like that. I need about 3 weeks to rot on the couch and just let my brain recover.
Yeah.
From what I just did.
You have to digest, you just went through a marathon. Well, good for us, the readers. There's 3 more coming. And of course, there's all the other books you've written before. So I have my pick. But thank you so much. I'm really glad to have met you. And I'm really glad for your books. They have been inspiring to me.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate you reaching out and your message and all of that. It means a lot.
Thank you. What stays with me after sitting with this conversation is how often the most potent medicine arrives in a story we didn't think to read. Karla writes football romance. The covers signal one thing, the synopsis another, and yet the rooms behind those covers hold something else entirely. A generational father wound, named clearly and tended carefully, men learning late and imperfectly that they were always allowed to ask for help, women claiming their own ground without becoming anyone's healer. None of it announces itself, and yet all of it lands. And that's what I think these stories are doing, quietly, below the radar of official culture, tending wounds that don't always get tended, rehearsing futures the world doesn't know how to offer yet, doing the work in a language of pleasure, because pleasure is one of the few languages we still share in common. So here's what I want to leave with you. What story has found you sideways, picked up almost by accident, dismissed as not your usual fare, and yet it's given you something you didn't know you needed? Sit with that one for a moment. Let it speak. If something landed for you in this conversation, I love to hear about it. Comments are open over on my Substack. Also, share this episode with someone who might be ready to find Karla's books too. And if you'd like more conversations like this, subscribe or wherever you listen. Until next time, cheerio.